Hey, there we are.
I don't know why I
listening.
insist on raising the volume every single time. But I'm just praying that this microphone's working.
That'd be nice.
It'd be nice.
We'll find out.
It was working earlier. So, welcome.
Welcome, Goslings.
Welcome. Sorry
someone
that we're a little
joined.
late. Hi,
It's
Olivia.
Olivia Harris. Hello, Olivia Harris.
We were Googling the difference between affect versus effect.
Which we thought we knew, but kind of didn't know.
We didn't, but that's the whole point of Hot Goss, is to explore
teach us
the
new
things that we think we know, but maybe we don't. So Arande, what are we talking about this time around?
We're talking about wants and also needs.
And why do we feel like this lovely last day in January is a good time to talk about that?
Well, I think. Oh, did someone say something? The first. You
Yeah.
don't know. You don't know vowels. Well, because we're talking about January is such a time where people are trying to set the pace for the rest of the year, right? They're trying to do new resolutions, and I know I've been talking to a lot of people, and there's in new relationships or in weird places in their relationship, and I feel like I keep asking about communication and wants versus needs. And we're wait, that's actually a perfect hot goss topic.
Yeah,
So,
we were talking about it with our neighbor Daisy Hackett, licensed social worker.
yes, we'll hear more about that later.
Yeah, which we're super excited about. And she was like, "Oh, I really want to join in on this conversation about wants and needs and communication." And so, if you have any questions for us, either while you're watching live or later, feel free to post them. And we're going to do a follow-up interview with Daisy, who specializes in working with teens and young adults, especially around issues of relationships and communication. And she's going to have some really great insight, I think, about this topic too.
Yeah.
So we're going to start the conversation, and then we'll continue it later. So, OC.
Yes, that's me.
That's you.
Next question.
little office insider tip. Why does Speak About It specifically have a unique angle or something to add to this conversation about wants and needs?
So we realized that we talk a lot about speaking about things, and we also talk a lot about pleasure, but we never fully talk about why are those two things aligned with us.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really important just to take a second to talk about that we talk a lot about pleasure in our conversations, because if you are doing things that you want to be doing and things that your partner wants to be doing, it's less likely that you're assaulting them. It's less likely that anyone's getting hurt in the situation. And also, so much of the narrative about sex up until now, and the sex ed field, has been so negative, right? It's been focusing on these unhealthy interactions. And we want to focus on what happens when everyone's having the ideal interaction, right? If you're having sex with somebody, you ideally want it to be good and you want it to be pleasurable. And if you're doing things that both of you like and want that feels pleasurable, then you'll have the best interaction.
Cool. So we feel like pleasure is central to both needs and wants when it comes to sexual encounters and relationships. Cool.
And consent, yeah.
And consent. Okay, so my next question for you is a little bit of a definition question, because I'm kind of curious, because I think we sort of understand the hierarchy of needs in everyday life, but what constitutes a need sexually or in a relationship, and what constitutes a desire or a want, and how do you tell the difference?
Yeah, I think that a good way of telling the difference is trying to think can I exist without this thing, right? Or have I existed in a situation without this thing, and how did I feel? Because I think that a need is something that you that has to be there in order for you to be able to go on and feel happy and healthy and complete and full. And I think that, or even satisfied. Whereas I think that a want is something that would be awesome if it was there, right? But you could take or leave and still have a perfectly lovely time. Yeah.
That's interesting. I was thinking about this earlier, but do you feel at the end of the day, in a normal, not sexual encounter, pleasure isn't a need, but in sex, do you feel pleasure, not maybe the ultimate, this is sort of a leading question, but maybe the ultimate, most amazing pleasure you've ever felt isn't a need, but that at the root, pleasure needs to be present, or liking what's happening needs to be present?
Well, yeah, I think exactly.
Yeah.
I think that that in order for the interaction to be I think healthy, or even I don't say successful, but I'll say a healthy interaction. I think pleasure to some extent needs to be there, right? But I think that there's a difference between being neutral on something and actively not enjoying what's happening, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that neutrality is fine, right? But you don't want to only be in interactions where you're never getting anything that you want, right? And I think as soon as, if you are neutral on something, I think as soon as you're thinking I'd rather not be in this interaction, I'd rather be doing something else, I think it's you're no longer dealing with pleasure or avoid of pleasure, and you're
Right.
moving into like I'm actively not enjoying
Right.
myself.
And so like your needs are not being met anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's as I'm moving forward in this conversation, because it will get, I think, a little stickier when we talk about needs, like that's sort of the framework that I want to move forward in, is
Mhm.
understanding that like baseline, people are happy with what's going on is a
Mhm.
need. Cool. And so then related to that, what factors in people's lives or what have you do you think shape their needs versus their wants?
I was like trying to think about that. I think it's literally anything. I think that like for every human being, I think those could be different things. So it's like our past sexual relationships, our past like romantic relationships, our like friendships, our families, like other things that have happened to us, like media, our social circles. And what's I think really fascinating is that like I don't think there's any particular reason why a need can't be a want in another situation and vice versa.
That was gonna be my follow-up question.
Yeah, I think those things can like really transition, right? And so, for example, like you might need one partner to like really like validate you all the time, right? Like and affirm that like, oh, like I love you and we're supposed to be together and all these things. But then in another relationship, for whatever reason, just inherently feel more comfortable there, right? And like you like might want that, but you don't need it to feel safe and comfortable and secure.
Yeah.
So I think those things just change.
Yeah, it feels to me like that's sort of a message for like continually listening and hearing partners, especially new partners, for like what they're saying, because like their needs might be really different than yours, and their needs might be really different from your last relationship. You know, there's a lot of opportunity to like misexpress your needs, and it's a really interesting perspective to think about. And so then, in terms of like stating needs and communicating needs, who in a relationship is responsible for stating their needs? And then on the flip side, if those needs aren't met, whose responsibility is it?
That's such a hard question. And it feels
like it's sticky.
Yeah. I think it's everyone involved, honestly.
Okay.
Because I think that like we talked about this a little bit with our holiday and the expectations episode, right? Being able to talk about when you have an expectation for somebody else, right? That involves someone else's actions or someone else's emotions. You're signing yourself up for a sticky situation, right? Like you like really you can only control your own things. And like I think related to that, when you have an expectation for someone that you haven't communicated to them, you're really signing yourself up for like a lot of potential disappointment. So I think that if you have a need, I think it's up to you to like A, talk to yourself and figure out what that need is, and then B, communicate that to a partner. But then on the flip side, if you're with someone and you care about them and you respect them, then like you should probably want to know what those needs are to make sure that you're like being the person that they like need you to be, you know? And so I think it's kind of on everyone.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is like there's this onus for constant check-in with any sort of sexual situation or relationship so that you can be sure that you're giving somebody ample opportunity to state their needs and simultaneously like giving yourself ample opportunity to state your needs. So there is a lot of sort of like inherent trust and vulnerability and openness that is going into any sexual encounter, even if it's just like a one-time hookup.
Yeah, and I think like constant check-in like is like yes, like I think in an ideal way, right? Like not everyone like wants to have to like talk that much even like during sex. But I think that like it needs to be known that that's a conversation that you're aware of and willing to have, right? And I think that like you need to be aware of like how the other person seems in those dynamics. And I think that you as a person need to know enough about your communication style, right? Where like if you know that you don't like having to bring things up, right? Like you don't want to feel like you're being a bother. Like you'll talk about it if someone else asks you a question. Like then you should tell your partner that, right? Be like, hey, I just don't always feel comfortable bringing things up, but like so if we're trying something new, like I need you to check in with me, right? Or like, hey, these are the things that I do or say like, I'm not comfortable, so like just be aware, you know?
Yeah.
Because I think that like it is important to like constantly like explicitly check in, but sometimes I think there's other ways of getting that information across.
Well, I think that's sometimes where we run into a lot of sticky situations in relationships. Sometimes not like necessarily assault situations, but sort of like bumps in the road in terms of sexual relationships or just like whatever relationships is not knowing what the other person wants and not feeling like you can figure that out. And I think there's a lot of arguments that come from that. So that's really interesting. And so then my next question, obviously I haven't written down this notebook, which is why I keep opening it, is kind of related. Do you think, in your opinion, and I don't think there's a perfect answer to this question, just to frame it, do you think it is okay to be able to set like a requisite set of like conditions in which to hook up? So like XYZ has to be fulfilled in order to hook up, and like is there a line? Who gets to determine what's reasonable and what's reasonable as a want or what's reasonable as a need?
I think that like it's not on anyone to like be able to judge someone else's like wants or especially needs as like reasonable or unreasonable. But I think that any given like moments.
Mhm.
You just don't have to have sex with any person.
Right. Like we
And
say,
so-
what is the thing that you say about like we're sex what positive?
Oh, we're
but-
sex positive, but not sex pursuant, right?
Okay.
And so like we're not telling people that they like have to go and like have all of the sex that is offered to them at any given moment, right? Like you get to choose and like do the things that feel right for you, but like that means that you are probably gonna say no to a bunch of different situations. So I think that like if you for whatever reason like it's hard because I think two things that look the same can be different things, right? So like a person that might be like, I want a partner to like take me to a 5-star dinner and like talk to me for 2 hours before we can have sex. Like to some people it might seem like a little absurd, but like for them they might be like, I just want them to like really show that they're interested in me as a person, right?
Right. And who am I to judge that?
Yeah, right. So like that's fine. But also like if the person just like wants to like feel chased, like that doesn't feel awesome to me. But like who am I to tell them that like as long as they're like being open and honest about the things they're doing, then like sure, I think that feels fine.
So related to sort of our like going back to our New Year's resolution kind of thing, it feels like this conversation about wants and needs is something that you really need to have with yourself and with your partners. And like it seems like it's a lot of work and yeah, we need to be developing tools to have those conversations. It's really tough. Yeah. And maybe we'll talk to Daisy more about that. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about specifically wants and fantasy. But before we do that, Olivia has
Here's the thing.
thing.
We're so far from it.
I'm like,
How do you recommend we start outlining this for ourselves? Oh,
well, wait, no, I think that's actually a good question because I sort of was like, it's work, and then was like,
next.
next question. But like, yeah, do you have any tips for like before we talk about fantasy? Let's talk about how do you outline your needs for yourself?
I think those things are related, and I think that they like one kind of leads into the other. And I alluded to it earlier, but I think that like beginning a conversation about like, cool, have I existed without this thing before?
Yeah.
How did I feel? Have I existed with this thing before? How did I feel?
Yeah.
Right? And like, can I imagine myself existing again without it? Right? So like I'm a talker, right? And so like I like need a partner that like is okay, like not just talking about their emotions, but like really like talking about my emotions, right? And like both sides of that need to be there for me. And I've been in situations where I've like had pieces of that and none of that and like all of that. And being able to see that like, oh, I know that like that is a need for me. Because like the point that I didn't have that, like I didn't feel secure in the relationship or I felt bad about myself or like any of these things. And so I think asking that question is really helpful. I think also being able to look around at the world and like kind of like intuit from other people's situations, right? And so be like, cool, like this is a thing that I see in the world. Like, is that something that I can see myself having, right? And I think that kind of leads into fantasy, right? And so like, we're visual people, right? And so or like and like visual not just being like people I can see, but I mean like a mind's image as well. And so I think like a way to begin exploring fantasies is beginning to like think of these different situations and like project yourself into it and be like, is this a thing that I can see myself like doing or being comfortable with? And then have that conversation with a partner.
Yeah, so it seems like there's a couple different tools or a lot of different tools that you would have at your disposal to explore your wants and your needs, whether it's like spending some time with your imaginative self or like spending some time bouncing ideas off of your partner, or maybe if you're not partnered but you're sort of curious about what you need in a hookup or relationship with friends or a therapist.
Or even like books, right? Like you can like read a blog, read a book. Like, it's
journaling.
Like, there's like a lot of different ways to like begin to explore that.
And I think this is a definite question we're gonna ask Daisy, because I wonder if she has any sort of like specific exercises or prompts or activities that like do help you think about what you need in a relationship. I think that's a really interesting thing to continue exploring. But I want to be sensitive over time and get our last question about fantasy in, because that's sort of like our juicy fun question. And so my biggest question about fantasy is sort of, how do you communicate that want or desire to a partner? That's my first.
So I think like the like big shock, like we would say, like just speak about it.
But like how?
Right. But I think that like that isn't super helpful for everyone because like the people that would ask that question maybe don't feel comfortable speaking about it, and so I think that the next part is be easy, right? Like I think that people think that because I might be like a little interested in like being handcuffed maybe someday, they think they need to like get a kit to like hang themselves from the ceiling with a partner. It's like those are two different things, right? And so I think that a good way in is like there's movies and TV and porn, right? I think especially porn is like a great way to start, right? Like being like, cool, like show me something that you're interested in, you know? And you can like watch that together and communicate that and be like, oh, that's interesting. Is that something that you would want to try, or is that just something that you like seeing? I think even those are two different things, right? Things that we like to think about versus things that we actually want to do. And so like having that conversation with a partner, and then if you find something that they're like, oh yeah, I think I might want to do that, right? Or you show them something and be like, hey, I think I might want to try this thing. There's no need to jump all the way to 100, right? So you can start by like maybe trying to masturbate and watch this thing and be like, is this something that we both enjoy? Or like trying to like lightly dip your toe in. So like if someone's interested in foot stuff,
lightly dip that toe in.
just like see a little bit. Like there's no need to like jump
Yeah.
all the way to 100. I think that people get discouraged by these like conversations like kink and fetish because they think that and fantasy because they think that they have to go all in, and like there's so many different steps along the way to
Right.
any of those. I think along with that, I think allowing yourself to I guess like allowing yourself to go on that journey in like a way that feels organic, right? So like if you are the type that like wants to like string yourself from the ceiling like with ropes and ties, like that's great. But if you like purely are just interested in like I just want to watch this thing with you, like let yourself stop there, right? You have to like really like listen and check in about it. So
it is like as much self work about your own fantasy as sort of like guiding your partner through it. And I think that's really like your comment on going slow is also sort of a comment on like what fantasy could be, because fantasy could be a lot of different things. Fantasy could be like role play, or fantasy could just be like, I want to try a different way of hooking up. It doesn't have to be like kink, it can be a lot of different things. And frankly, when we're talking about fantasy, we are at the root talking about desire. And so that relates to my last question that has to do with fantasy and want is, when we're talking especially about like fantasy, we're usually talking about like somebody wants to do something. And so that person who has that fantasy tends to be put in the driver's seat. And so my question specifically regarding wants and needs around that is like, how do you set up a situation where like if the other person is like unsure but like down to try, like how do you make sure everybody's wants and needs are met in that situation? So if you need I can give you a hypothetical.
No.
You want,
Oh well, maybe a hypothetical like help the audience.
Yeah. So let's use the foot play thing. So say we're like really into foot stuff, and like you're to your partner like, let's do some foot stuff. I want you to suck my toes, and the partner is like, I'm not sure, but I'll try it. How do you manage that situation to make sure that like all your needs and wants, or most of your needs and wants are met? All of your needs, some of your wants are met.
I think like asking them like, so like what are your hesitations? Like what are your hesitations, right? And like what do they surround? Because if it's like things that like feet are dirty, maybe then it's like, oh, so we shower first,
we will
right?
wash my feet.
Yeah, or like if it's like if there's a weird power imbalance, or like I don't want to feel subservient or something like that, then it's like cool. Like what if the dynamics were reversed? Like what if I was doing something to you instead? Like does that make you feel better? And like figuring things out, and like and if that doesn't work, then being like, cool. Like what are the pieces that like you can see yourself doing? So I think that like that feels like that, and then I think also like beginning in a way that feels like lower impact, right? So like maybe it's like watching something or doing something small. And then I think lastly, doing it in a way where you as the driver are really clear on what the other person's like emotional state is, right? And so I think like that's the place where like constant check-in is probably really healthy, right? Telling the person like asking the person rather like, how do I know when you're like not in this anymore? You know, like what are your signs? Like what are you gonna like say and feel and look like? I think being really, really communicative in that is gonna be like, it's always important, but I think it's especially important in those moments. And I think not taking it super personally if
they're like not into it.
Yeah, if they're not into it. Because I think like one of the biggest fears is like when we're like trying to like bring up like kinks and fetish and fantasy and all that, is that like our partner's going to judge us for it. And I think that like it's not necessarily a judgment on you, it's just like a thing that you happen to like, right? So like I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Not everyone likes it, and I don't take it as a personal slight.
We still hang out.
Yeah, right. And so I think because of that, if you were still dealing with like being accepted for liking those things, I think it's easier to have that conversation like when you have your pants on, right? So like all of these things that we're telling you, all these conversation pieces, probably aren't for when you're like actively in the middle of having sex. It's probably like something like before that is actually happening.
Well, and I think you're getting at a really interesting thing with the like, for example, the TV show thing, where like I think there's also a piece about reciprocity in there that you were getting at. Like I really love Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but I know that other people don't. So maybe the next night you watch, I don't know, Riverdale, because I love Riverdale. That being said, we both love Riverdale, so we're getting mutual pleasure out of that. But like figuring out those like sort of not compromises, but ways in which like, okay, we tried this fantasy, but like what do you want to do?
Yeah, and I think it's exactly that, right? It's like going back to like everyone's needs need to be met, and then like how do you maximize everyone's wants? If one person's always getting 90% of their wants, and the other person's always have to compromise 90% of their wants, like that might be a dynamic you want and are happy with, but like you should really examine that. Like, is that actually the dynamic you want
Yeah.
to be in?
I love that of like making sure everyone's needs are met and maximizing wants as equally as possible. And I feel like that's a really big takeaway where we can end.
Yay!
Yay! But I want to give 2 plugs because this like plug is a funny word for the next conversation that we're gonna have. So their little fantasy question was a little teaser for our next episode. We're so excited in February. Technically after Valentine's Day, but whatever. We're going to be going to a sex toy store and sex boutique, Nomia, in Portland, and we're going to be talking all about sex toys and sex boutiques and props and things like that, and having a great conversation about consent and sex toys.
Which I just want to go back to Catherine's original joke about plugs, making a plug. It is a brilliant joke.
If you don't get it, Google it. But we won't shame you for that. So yeah, that's really exciting. And if you're like totally into this conversation about wants and needs and communication and looking for tools for how to better communicate with yourself or with your partner about that stuff, a reminder that we're going to be doing an interview with Daisy Hackett, who's a
She's
social
so
worker
good, yeah.
and a counselor, and she's so lovely. Next week, and we'll be posting that on our blog.
Yay!
Yay! Anything else you have to say?
Bye, Hosgoslings.
You're
I know
fired.
words. Bye, Hot Goslings.
Oh boy.
Hosgoslings.
Oh, we didn't scroll. Oh, it's still on.